In May 2009, I had just broken up with my girlfriend of almost 3 years. We had moved from Calgary to Toronto and were still stuck living together after the breakup, as we didn't know many people in the city just yet. Needless to say, the situation was pretty stressful and upsetting, so when a buddy I was going to school with at the time suggested a weekend camping/fishing trip, I jumped at the chance. He grew up in an area about an hour outside of Toronto called Flamborough. It's really beautiful, loads of lush forests, farmers' fields, and small rivers and creeks. We decided to go camp and fish along a creek called Grindstone Creek. It's close to some wetlands and the fishing is supposed to be great. We ended up setting up our camp in what was probably a farmer's field. I'm guessing it was trespassing on our part, bordered by a gorgeous forest. We spent the evening fishing, shooting the shit, and drinking some quality craft beers. As it got darker, we made a little fire and roasted potatoes and hot dogs. All in all, it was a really good night. We turned in just after midnight and we shared a tent. My buddy fell asleep before me and I stayed up playing on my phone until probably around 1:30. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was being woken up by a high-pitched yipping type noise. I was kind of groggy and it took me a moment to fully wake up. The yipping was incessant and it sounded like a weird coyote. I laid there for a moment listening and then started playing on my phone again. The noise was annoying as hell. I tried ignoring it, but it sounded like it was getting closer. Finally, it sounded like it had to be no more than 10 feet from the tent. At this point, I was getting a little unsettled. I had seen coyotes in Calgary before, and I thought of them as pretty harmless. They never looked much bigger than a smallish dog, but what if this one was rabid or something? What if it could smell our food? I have a pretty bad anxiety disorder, so I'm prone to worrying about these types of things. I nudged my buddy to see if he was awake, and he was. The noise woke him up too. We discussed what to do about the coyote, as we hadn't brought anything to scare off critters. Not a BB gun, nothing. Finally, he decided he would shine the flashlight on it and holler a lot, hopefully scaring him off. He unzipped the tent, and I watched him pointing the flashlight out into the darkness. I'll never forget what happened next. His legs suddenly went all wobbly and he sort of stumbled backwards into the tent. He had a really dumbfounded look on his face when he looked at me and babbled, "It's not a coyote, it's a dude. It's some weird dude." Normally, I would have thought he was messing with me, but I've never seen someone look that scared, and I never want to see that expression on someone's face ever again. So I know he wasn't pulling my leg. The weird yipping and howling type noises were still going on, and in retrospect, it really didn't sound like a coyote, but I guess in our groggy states, it was a way for our brains to make sense of it. Anyway, he kept telling me to just look at the tent flap to make sure he's not crazy. At this point, I was having a full-blown anxiety attack. My heart was racing. I felt like shit, but I had to look. So I slowly peeked out the flap and waited for my eyes to adjust. And that's when I saw him. He was standing only a few arm lengths away from the tent. He was swaying a little and wearing a baseball cap. What made it awful though, what was really creepy, was that he was wearing women's lingerie. That's when I knew there was most likely something wrong with this guy. If the making high-pitched noises at strangers in a tent in the middle of the night didn't give it away. After I pulled my head back inside the tent, my buddy and I discussed what to do. Finally, we decided to yell at the guy to fuck off. My buddy started yelling, "Excuse me, can you fuck off? We're trying to sleep in here." The noise stopped. It was dead silent, and that's when we heard footsteps running towards the tent. They stopped right outside the tent, but we didn't waste any time. We started yelling again, "Seriously, fuck off. We have cell phones in here. If you don't fuck off, we're going to call the cops." With that, we heard him walk by the tent and head off. Sounded like he was moving towards the road. Needless to say, we laid awake, petrified until the first sign of sunlight. Then, we hightailed it the hell out of there. We discussed our experience on the way home, and we're both pretty embarrassed about how scared we got. It definitely was not manly on either of our parts. I think because we were both ashamed of how we let some weirdo freak us out so much, we really haven't talked about it since that day. So, there you go. That's my weird story. I'll always wonder what the hell that guy was doing out there, or what was wrong with him. Sometimes, I wonder if things would have turned out differently if we were a couple of girls. I'm not saying he was some serial killer, but he seemed like he was testing who was in the tent. Guess I'll never know. And for that, I'm kind of glad. I'm sure we've all heard of Disney, right? That adorable mouse and all the other lovable characters. Well, when I was a child, my favorite was Pinocchio. He had always appealed to me. The simple fact of him wanting to be a boy was charming, and yet strangely unsettling. I mean, what would he do to become a boy? I also found his growing nose quite amusing. Apologies, my name is Brian, and I used to live in a little town in Oklahoma that was known as Vialville, which is French for Old Town. I used to live near some people who loved Disney, and I mean they loved it, so much so that their car had Mickey ears. They seemed like nice people. I didn't get to talk to them much, but from what I heard from other people, they were strange. All they talked about was Disney. I even heard a story of a guy who threw them out. He actually died a few days later. The police found him dead on the floor with white goop surrounding him. Nothing else was found. Just him and that strange white goop. As any murder story in a little town, it popped up on the news as well. Breaking news. Typically, I believe what's on the news, but this time, my brain had a different idea. It told me that all of what they were saying was crap. I didn't know who or what killed him, but the main thing I had to question was the goop. Who would spread goop over a corpse, and what was it? I did get scared, and I couldn't sleep for several nights. Well, they left the house a few months back. I don't know why they just left. No rhyme, no reason. It was actually very strange. They left after the murder took place. But after they left, no one could find them, so the police couldn't ask questions or anything. Typically at this point, I'd give you my thoughts and everything, but this isn't a murder mystery. This is about a rather strange encounter I had at that home. Why I went there will be explained, so keep on listening. Well, I heard that in that house, they left a few treasures. One of those being a rather large Pinocchio doll. Of course, hearing this, my child sparked up inside me, and I wanted that thing so bad. I thought it would be bad to go in there and steal, but then I heard of two guys that went in there and got items and actually sold them for some good money. That really sparked something inside me, and I began to think and think. If they could go in there, so could I. It may seem that I wanted to sell the doll for money, but no. I wanted it for myself. I have no kids, in case you're wondering. I bounced back on the idea for a few days. One day I thought I would go there, but then my angel side said no. But after about 4 days of haggling with my own mind, I couldn't help it any longer. I felt something wash over me. Yeah, I felt agreed and eventually decided to go in there. I took the next opportunity I got, which happened to be 5 days after I had heard of the other two guys. It seemed to all fall in place perfectly. The day after I decided to go there, I get my opportunity. Was this destiny? Nah, just my mind going on. It was a rather normal day. I didn't seem to have anything special to do, so I saw the opportunity and took it while I had the chance. My days seemed to stay on a schedule, but that's another story. I brought 3 things: a bag, a camera, and a flashlight. I knew it would be dark, so I brought the flashlight. The bag would be for whatever I took, and the camera was so I could show my friends so they wouldn't think I was lying. After I got everything ready, I was ready to go on this little adventure. Then it came. The night was upon me. It had come much faster than I expected. It had only taken me about 10 minutes to get everything ready. I made sure of my surroundings, and then I set off. Like I said, I didn't live very far away, maybe like a block. I mean, if I were to stand on a very high thing, then I would be able to see their house. Anyway, as I walked there, I seemed to be having flashbacks of the guy who died. I felt something uneasy in the air, and that uneasiness only seemed to rise as I grew closer to the old, rotting place. I didn't know what to expect out of the house. A rotting piece of trash? Yeah, I expected that too. I seemed to get to the house much faster than I thought I would. I was hoping it would take longer. I didn't know if I would be able to do it. It wasn't huge. It was only 1 story tall, and had what appeared to be maybe 5 rooms. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It still looked horrible, but not the kind of condition you'd expect from an old home. Meanwhile, I stepped inside. It was dark, so instinctively, I turned on my flashlight. As soon as I flicked it on, something seemed to move. I looked around, and there was nothing unusual. I just shrugged and let my eyes wander the room, curious to see what was in there. This room had brown walls made of wood that seemed to be decaying every waking moment. The couches, which there were only 2 of, were white and very dusty. I hit one of the cushions to see how much dust would kick up. Knowing my luck, a lot of dust did. It got caught in my eyes and it made me cough. I couldn't see anything with the dust in my eyes, which made my brain, of course, flash images of the dead guy. I seemed to forget about the dust and my eyes shot open. Nothing too odd here. Then my ears seemed to pick up a sound. It was low, so I had to be very quiet to hear it. It sounded like coughing, which I thought was odd, considering I had just coughed. The rest of the room wasn't much to speak of, with the exceptions of the items within the room itself. The items were very odd. There were the normal things, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, and etc. But there was a certain thing that I saw that really made me want to run. It was a shelf, but on the shelf were some heads. Not human heads, no, Disney heads. Goofy's, Mickey's, and Donald's. It was unsettling, not enough to make me vomit, but still, my stomach began to feel uneasy. There seemed to be some sort of white substance dripping from them. Then, he popped into my head. The dead man. He had been found with the goop around him. That's when my stomach really lurched. My brain was basically yelling at me to leave, but for whatever reason, I had to go on. I swear, I saw one of those eyes move. Maybe it was the paranoia getting to me, but I don't think it was. Despite my best instincts telling me to get out now, I continued into the house. I ventured further into the house, into the kitchen. There were smashed plates and glasses on the ground, and there were some cobwebs. I thought it was odd. Do houses like this typically have cobwebs and dust, even when they've only been abandoned for a few months? What was even weirder was the center of the room. There was a fairly large wood table in the center of the room. There was a Disney-themed tablecloth. The tablecloth was torn, but the table seemed untouched. What was weird about the tablecloth, aside from the rips and tears, was that every one of the Disney characters on the cloth had some sort of deformity, like Mickey had no ears, Goofy didn't have his little black nose, and Donald was missing a leg. Realizing I had the camera, I snapped a picture. The camera flash was creepy in the dark. It really lit up the characters' deformities, which was not good for my stomach. It was weird. I seriously thought that I was going to puke right then and there, but I didn't. I thought my mental state was going to deplete faster, but no. My brain seemed to be giving me mixed signals. At one moment, it wanted me to get out as fast as my legs would carry me. Then, it would want me to go further for the sake of my own sick curiosity. This brain of mine is too weird to understand. I guess my brain wanted to get back at me for coming here because I felt as if something was behind me. I didn't turn around immediately as I was fearful as what I would see. I thought I was going to die. My heart began to pound. I began sweating like a flipping waterfall. I slowly turned around, shocked by what my eyes were met with. Nothing. Nothing was behind me except dead air space. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. I threw some light where I was looking just to make sure that nothing was there, and sure enough, there was nothing there. I had to shake my head and stay there for a second before I carried on. I then went back to the living room and took a right. I scanned the hallway, which seemed to be in the worst state. The paint was peeling, the roof dipped down at one point, and it seemed like the whole roof could collapse at any second. Then, my eyes seemed to twitch towards something. I saw a bedroom. I shined my flashlight into it, and it seemed untouched. The bed was intact. The walls were still gorgeously painted with a light blue. It looked as if it belonged to a young boy. It was at that moment that my brain remembered why we were here, to get the doll. Knowing that my treasure could be in there, I shined my light around. No immediate threats, so I decided to go in there, and in there was that one item that I wanted. That Pinocchio doll. I quickly walked over to it and put the light on it. The first thing that caught my eyes were his eyes. They seemed to be more realistic than most dolls were. It was odd, for lack of a better word. It had white goop dripping from its nose and eyes, much like the heads I had just seen. My brain then connected something, the man who died, and this goop. Were they related somehow? First the man, then the heads, and now this. It wasn't blood, that's for sure. What was this foreign substance? I decided to be stupid though, and put some on my finger. I lifted it to my nose and smelt it. It was awful. My nose wrinkled up and my eyes watered. It smelled like sewage. What in the world would have gotten into this doll to make it smell like that? I didn't want to be here any longer. I'd had enough of this. I just wanted to get the doll and go home. I decided that I would clean it at home. I gathered it up and put it into the bag. It was a little heavier than I imagined, but nothing I couldn't handle. I had gotten what I came for, the doll. My spirits seemed to lighten a little bit. I walked out of the bedroom. I thought that all this crazy paranoia stuff would stop, until, that is, I saw one of the heads twitch. Wait, what? That was my first thought. Why was this head twitching? I had to stop and just stare, and the head seemed to be fine with that. It kept on twitching, getting more and more violent, more of that white goop coming out of it. It went all over the room. Some of it hit me in the face, and of course I repulsed back. What the hell is happening? I had finally snapped. I couldn't take this anymore. Then my bag rustled. I turned to be met with a hand popping out of my bag. I tore my bag off and dropped it on the floor. My heart began pounding like a drum. The doll crawled out of the bag and looked at me, its eyes fixed on my body, and the white goop dripping out of its mouth and eyes.
"Welcome to the House of Disney,"
it said in that sweet, innocent Pinocchio voice. I began to walk back. The doll didn't follow. It just stood there and said,
"Welcome to the House of Disney."
It said it repeatedly. Fear was rising inside me until I had to run. That doll muttered one last thing before I turned and ran.
"Welcome to the House of
Hell." I darted out of the house with no plans to ever return. What just happened? Is that doll possessed? It didn't take me long until I got back to my home. I ran inside and slammed the door. Then I collapsed on the floor, trying to calm myself down. I had to contemplate what the hell just happened. Was this some sick prank? Or was it something more? I realized something. My camera. I still had it. I sat up quickly and looked at it. I went to the full album to see the pictures I took, but on there was a picture I didn't take. Remember that man I mentioned? There was a picture of that doll, strangling him. The white goop was oozing out of the doll's eyes and mouth. It was also seeping out of the doll's hands, and it covered the guy. I stared at the camera for what seemed like forever. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Who or what took that picture? I definitely didn't take it. I threw the camera away as hard as I could. It smashed on the wall. I didn't care if I would be called a liar. I didn't want anything to do with that doll. I didn't want anything to do with that house. I got up and sat on my couch. I had to relax my brain. It was thrashing violently, and you know what? I felt something drip on me. I looked at my shoulder to be greeted by white goop. I never figured out what had caused that goop. But remember how I said I used to live there? Yeah, that's the reason I moved. I was scared. I had to flee, and flee fast. Now that I sit in my home typing this, I realize now they might have moved. Have you ever gone wild with your friends? So wild that life becomes boring for weeks after? Those are the best. I lived for those times. It's the rest of the space in between that I can't stand. Every time I watch my friends leave, I'd be hit with a burst of anxiety because I knew it was back to my mundane, monotonous life of working a job I didn't like, dealing with people I didn't care about, and living a life I didn't want. I could go on and on about how terrible my life has been. I could sit for hours and tell you about the mother that walked out on me or the father that would beat me on a whim. I could go on for days about the kids at school who rejected me for being weird, but that's not what this is about. However, I will tell you a few things. First and foremost, I was intellectually gifted, as one of my elementary school teachers told me. According to state testing, I was ranked in the top 1% of the country, but despite this, I found school to be extremely painful. I barely passed my classes from year to year because I wouldn't bother to show up. I mean, why would I? My choice was between going to a class where everyone treated me like shit, studying material a retard could understand, or hanging out with the only group of people on this earth who accepted me for who I am. I can still hear my teacher saying, "Ryan, you need to buckle down, young man." The fact that I got through school, showing up once every 2 weeks, really says a lot about the modern educational system, doesn't it? The times I did show up to class, I had to deal with Chad. Chad was the most popular kid in the school. He had a bunch of friends, good grades, and made it a personal goal to make my life a living hell. I hated Chad. I hated him more than Hitler hated Jews. I can't even tell you how many nights I'd spend praying that Chad would be diagnosed with cancer or get hit by a car and die in agonizing pain. Unfortunately, I never realized that God would never answer my prayers, any of them. I'd have had better luck killing and torturing Chad myself and praying for forgiveness, because that's just how God works. Well, anyway, as the years passed, I found myself working a shitty job, making enough to stay alive. I had nobody who cared about me. I'd have been completely alone in this world had it not been for my friends. We all lived pretty far from each other, but despite this, on the last weekend of every month, we'd all go wild. We raised a lot of hell over the years. Thankfully, we never got caught for the shit we did. I think the most fun I ever had in my life was the Sunday morning we were playing mailbox baseball. The game is pretty self-explanatory. We came up to one house where an old, grumpy man lived. He just so happened to be getting his morning paper as we drove by and smashed his mailbox to pieces. I was the one who hit it, and I used a strong metal bat. The mailbox itself was shattered, and we all roared with laughter as the old man dropped his coffee in surprise. That is my fondest memory I ever made with my friends. But once I was alone, it was me. Alone. Again. Nothing but my thoughts, which tortured me so. There was one thing I thought about quite often. My ex-girlfriend. Her name was Sarah. Sarah was the only girlfriend I ever had, and I honestly loved her. I loved her with all my heart. I still remember laying with her on the hood of my Toyota 96 and just looking up into the sky. I can still hear her voice too.
I love you, Ryan.
I wish I could just freeze that moment in time and never stop living it. I liked being with her more than I liked being with my friends, and trust me when I say, that's really saying something. Unfortunately, she just disappeared one day. No note, no goodbye, no nothing. One second she was the light of my soul, illuminating the fiber of my very existence, and the next, she was nowhere to be found. Out of my life, forever. That was 2 years ago now, and it still stings to think about it. I spent a lot of time looking for her, and I still don't know what to think. Was she gone because of something I did? I thought we had a perfect relationship, which is why it was such a surprise. Sarah was the only woman I ever had a relationship with, and I started to believe she was the only woman I would ever love. This sent me into a spiraling depression, and I drank even more than I usually did. The days leading up to seeing my friends seemed to go on forever. I didn't know what to do with myself. That woman was the only thing that truly gave me any hope for my future. I was a better version of myself when I was with her, and now she was gone. For all I knew, she was dead. She may as well have been, because I mourned her departure all the same. That Friday night, I got a call from my friend before he and the guys came over. I almost told them not to, but he persuaded me it would be dumb to sit in the house alone and cry over my ex. I agreed with him, and he said he'd be there in 5 minutes. When they arrived, we all started drinking and shooting the shit. Everyone shared their own story of getting dumped, which we've all heard dozens of times. It still made me feel a little bit better, though. I actually changed my mindset. I started thinking, this could be the last day of my life. I'm gonna live it to the fullest. After having a few more beers, I talked the guys into going for a few street races. They sheepishly agreed, and we were off. By the time we were on the road for a few minutes, I knew that I was a little too tipsy to be driving. But I knew I would be ridiculed for the rest of the night if I turned around. I started talking up how I was gonna win one race and leave the undefeated king. After challenging a few random strangers at red lights, we didn't get any bites. Until we came to the perfect road for a race. Some jackass in a white truck pulled up to the light. I revved my engine and looked over at him. He looked at me and revved his engine. As I looked inward, I noticed he was a total redneck. He was wearing a flannel shirt with suspenders and had to have been at least 100 pounds overweight. Being a northern transplant in the deep south, I yelled out the insult one might expect. "I'm gonna fuck you like we did back in the war, hick boy!" My friends all found it amusing, and we were a perfect cacophony of drunken slurs and laughter. The light turned green, and I put the car into drive. That was the last thing I remember before waking up in the hospital. I couldn't feel my legs, and I felt like someone who just met the wrong group of peaceful refugees. I looked up at the nurse and asked her what the hell happened. She looked on with a frown and told me that I was involved in a major car accident. "Where are all my friends? Are they alright?" She then told me I was the only survivor. I couldn't believe it. I didn't speak the rest of the time I was there. With my friends gone, I lost every single person in my life that I cared about. Now I had no girlfriend, no friends, and no future. What was I going to do now? Despite being a broken fragment of a human being, time marched on. Father Time didn't care about the tragedy of my life. After I physically recuperated from the accident, I was informed that I would never be able to walk again. On the surface, that sounded pretty bad, but I quickly realized that I was eligible for disability compensation. I made more money than I did when I had a job, and I didn't even have to do anything. I spent the first few months drinking and smoking weed. That was literally what I did from the moment I opened my eyes until the moment I was asleep again. I thought about suicide every day, and the guilt seemed to be crushing me from the inside. I don't even have something to compare it to. Maybe Jesse on Breaking Bad after he kills Gale and loses his mind, but this was real. I was responsible for the deaths of all my friends. Not to mention, my girlfriend just left me out of nowhere one day. After life continued on like this for a long time, I started to become completely apathetic. It was almost like there just wasn't a reason to do anything. A few more months went by, and I started to recover a little from everything that happened. I still had nightmares and everything, but it wasn't the only thing I thought about anymore. During this time, I found myself becoming increasingly bored. I never realized how much I depended on my friends to keep me sane. I just didn't have any fun whatsoever when they weren't around. One day, I decided to go out and buy a laptop. It had been a long time since I used one, and getting my internet service hooked up again was a real hassle. But the internet was pretty fun when I started using it again. I almost felt normal again. I ended up spending most of my time on the deep web. One night, I came across a horror video. The title was, "I Lost My Family to the Deep Web." The story was really interesting, and I wondered if it was true or not, but it got me genuinely interested in the deep web. I spent the rest of the night listening to deep web horror stories. After about 7 hours of stories, I called it a night. When I woke up the next morning, I started to wonder if I should download Tor and explore the deep web a bit myself. It had been a long time since I did my usual thrill-seeking, and I really needed a pick-me-up. Within 10 minutes, I had Tor downloaded and installed on my computer. My heart was pounding when I opened it. Was I going to be stalked and killed? Was I going to see some of the crazy things I heard about in those horror stories? I had no idea at the time, but I wanted nothing more than to find out. I started out exploring the hidden wiki. I must have clicked on 100 dead links before I even found a page that wasn't broken. That didn't bug me though. It wasn't like I had anything better to do. The first page I came across included instructions of some kind. After studying them thoroughly, I came to the realization that it was an instruction manual on how to make a bomb. They even had a section on how to set the timer and the kinds of places to put it in public for the most destruction. I was a little creeped out, but this bomb manual thing wasn't nearly shocking enough for my tastes. I needed something more. I did a little more browsing when I came across something that was truly crazy. It was a video, and in the video was a man with a black bag over his head. I started to get a bit nervous when the video started playing by itself. I thought to myself that I should stop it because I might see something that can't be unseen. But part of me wanted to see it anyway. I was looking for cheap thrills after all, right? There was some really ominous music in the background, and I began to feel extremely uncomfortable. The suspense was killing me, although I knew what was going to happen to the man from the very beginning. I almost clicked away after an entire minute passed, and the man continued to just sit there. I started to move my cursor toward the back button when I saw another man walk over to the man with the black bag over his face. The other man removed the bag and walked away. He then said something in another language. That was when I heard a loud noise. It sounded like a large metal trapdoor or something like that. All of a sudden, hundreds of scorpions fell from the ceiling onto this poor man. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. I'll never forget the way he screamed for those last few seconds. He was dead before he could take another breath. I sat in my chair, hardly believing what I'd just witnessed. As sick as it might be to admit this, I actually felt pretty exhilarated by this. My forehead was covered in cold sweat, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. And that was when my new hobby started to envelop my life. Aside from occasionally smoking a bowl, I'd spend all my time on the deep web, searching for the most disturbing things I could find. I don't know why I did, but it was so exciting. Even more exciting than all those crazy stunts I did with my friends. There was just something fascinating about the dark extremes of the human experience that gave me some weird high. I can't explain it, and I don't understand it. And I'm pretty sure that I don't want to. I could go on and on about the various things I'd seen on the deep web. I could talk about the disturbing child pornography, mutilation of animal carcasses, and torture that would make medieval Europeans cringe. But I'll skip over that for time's sake. I'm not entirely sure how long it had been. Perhaps a few months, maybe a year or two. I don't really know. I didn't keep track of the time. I didn't have a reason to. No job, no friends, nothing outside of my twisted little internet hobby. But it was around this time that I began to grow increasingly bored of the deep web. It seems once you spend enough time on there, it begins to feel like you've seen it all. After all, if I hadn't seen it all, I'd at least have seen most of it. But every time I thought about doing something other than browsing the deep web, I was reminded of the time I spent being alone and doing absolutely nothing. I didn't want to go back to that. I had no desire. Looking at torture porn on the deep web was better than that by a long shot. Well, one night I was browsing the dark web as usual, and something strange happened. A black chat box appeared on my screen. I didn't really know what to make of it. It just seemed out of this world. I was instantly brought back to all those horror stories about the deep web. Was this going to be the end of my deep web experience, or even my life? Ominous red text came to appear in the box. Can you talk? I got a chill down my spine and instantly felt spooked. I don't know if it was because this was so unexpected, or because I'd heard so many deep web horror stories that began just like this. Sure, I typed back. I bet you're really missing Sarah right now, aren't you? The stranger replied. I was taken aback. How the hell did he know about Sarah? I never even mentioned her anywhere on the internet. I felt my heart start to pound, but again like it used to when I first started using the deep web. But this time, it wasn't for excitement. It was from fear. I thought about shutting my laptop down, but I realized that this guy must have been stalking me for some time, if he knew about Sarah. I figured I may as well hear what he has to say at the very least. I started typing, yes, I do. How do you know about her? Who are you? He replied with only 2 words, but they left me seriously questioning my own sanity. The devil. I had no idea what to think. This guy not only knew about Sarah, but he claimed he was the devil. I sat there completely in shock for some time. That was a more likely explanation than some deep web hacker that just so happened to be stalking me for half my life. I know, it sounds dumb, but I actually believed him. Then he got me on a voice call, and I knew that my suspicions were confirmed. Hello?
How are you this evening?
I'm fine.
I understand how strange it must be for me to be contacting you like this, but there is something that I simply must inform you of.
And what's that?
You remember when Sarah left you, right?
Yes.
What if I told you that she left you for your worst enemy, Chad?
Bullshit. There's no way she would do that.
You do remember how materialistic she was, right? Is it really a stretch to think that she'd leave you, someone who could barely provide for himself, for someone who could buy her all the things her heart desired?
I don't believe
you. Don't have to take my word for it. Just look at Chad's Facebook profile. As you can see, they clearly have quite the loving relationship and don't mind sharing it with the world.
I couldn't fucking believe it. There she was, with Chad. There must have been hundreds of pictures of them. Pictures of them at the beach, shopping, and even kissing.
I think you'll really appreciate this status Sarah made just after she left you for Chad.
A month ago, I was stuck in a dead-end relationship with a loser who was never gonna get his act together. Now, I'm with a real man who knows how to treat a lady. This is the best decision I have ever made. I love you, Chad.
Why are you telling me this?
Because you can get away with the murder. Don't lie to me. I know it's already crossed your mind.
No, I can't. I'll spend the rest of my life in prison.
No, you won't. Look at who you're talking to. I can guarantee you get away with the murder. All you have to do is show up and shoot them.
I can't. Okay. I have a question.
Yes.
Is she happy?
She's much happier than she ever was with you.
If she's happier with him, then I can live with that. I can let her go. Then we're done here. We're done.
I will warn you now. This is a one-time offer. I can assure that you get away with the murder scot-free, but if you turn down my offer, there is no turning back. You will have to live in a world where the bastard who tormented you for 8 years stole the love of your life, and you did nothing about it. If you can live with that, then so can I.
What is your plan?
Very simple, actually. Like I said before, all you have to do is show up and put a bullet through both of their skulls.
Wait, I'm fine with killing Chad, but how can I kill Sarah too? I still love her.
She betrayed you. How can you be that much of a coward and let her get away with it?
I'll do it.
What was that?
Okay, I'll do it.
Alright, good. You made the right choice. You'll go over their house tonight, roll up to the front door in your wheelchair, knock, and when they answer, let 'em have it. You'll find a pistol in the cabinet where you keep your weed.
And you're sure I'll get away with it?
Only if you do what I tell you to do. If you deviate from the plan even a little, then you're on your own.
Okay. I'm in. And with that, the devil was gone just as fast as he had appeared. I didn't feel good about this whole thing, but what other choice did I have? The reason I got my friends killed was because of her. It was her fault that all my friends were dead. That bitch was gonna pay. I knew she never believed in me, and that Chad. Oh, how I was gonna love killing that curly-haired motherfucker. My heart was pumping as I made my way over there. I couldn't imagine something on this earth I wanted more than to see them dead. I licked my lips in anticipation to watch them die. When I got there, I instantly began to regret my decision. But I kept going anyway. I slowly wheeled myself up to their front door and rang the doorbell. My heart was pounding like a drum in my chest. Could I really go through with this? I almost turned around to leave, but then they opened the door together. They both looked really surprised to see me after all these years. I slowly raised the gun and pointed it toward Chad. My arm kept shaking, and I did my best to pull the trigger, but it just wouldn't shoot. That was when I realized I couldn't do it, so I dropped the gun and looked at the floor. "I'm sorry," I said.
Ryan, what the fuck are you doing here?
All of a sudden, the devil appeared out of nowhere. He gave me a disappointed look and picked up the gun. He then shot both Chad and Sarah in the head. I screamed at him, but it was no use. He vanished into thin air just as soon as he had appeared. I couldn't believe my eyes. Was I hallucinating? It all happened so fast. It didn't even seem like real life. I just sat there in my wheelchair for a minute, having just witnessed a double homicide. That was when I heard police sirens from behind me. 2 officers got out of the car and started screaming at me to freeze. I knew that I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison now, for sure. So, allow this to be a warning to those of you who use the deep web as I did. If you ever encounter the devil for yourself, whatever you do, don't take him up on his offer. Every summer since I was 4, my Nana took me and my sisters to California. I always loved going since she had a pool and let me drive around on her golf cart. I blamed teenage angst since I was turning 15 that summer, but I threw a huge fit to my mom over going. I had just gotten a boyfriend and didn't want to go long distances for a month. And all 3 of my younger sisters were going to tag along, meaning I had to babysit. Mom put her foot down and told me to suck it up, so obviously I was going to be a pretty pissy teen the whole time. So, beginning of June, we load up in Nana and Papa's van and head off. I live in a small coastal town in Oregon, so the trip was going to take around 2 days to get all the way down to Palm Springs. Looking back on it, I was totally miserable to be around, picking on my sisters, ignoring my grandparents, huffing and puffing the entire time. So, I really don't blame them for what they did. A day had passed since we finally made it to the rental home, when Mom called, excitedly telling me that since I was older now, I get a chance to travel, that it's fully paid for, how grateful I should be, etc. I interrupted her, saying that I go to Cali every year. Why is she so stoked about this time? No, kiddo, your Aunt Pat is flying you out to stay with her for the next 2 whole months. She's paying for it all. Isn't that so nice? I was so confused, and just stood there listening to her ramble on about the trip I was to take in a few days. Then I started to get pissy. What the fuck do you mean 2 months? Doesn't she live in Texas? Why am I going to fucking Texas? I was livid. Well, turns out that Papa had grown tired of my teenage moods pretty fast, rightfully so, and complained about it to his sister, Aunt Pat. She told him to send me to her, that it would be a good experience for me, all expenses paid. Nana and Papa didn't see an issue with it, and neither did my mom. I, on the other hand, saw plenty. My first thoughts were of my boyfriend back home, naturally, and being bored alone in Texas wasn't looking like a fun option either. I begged and begged my mom to let me stay in Cali, but she insisted that I go as a learning experience. So, the next 2 days I was completely sullen up until I was dropped off at the airport. It wasn't until I was actually boarding that I realized I hadn't seen my Aunt Pat or her husband Rick since I was 7. The only form of communication I had with them was the annual Christmas card with the attached $10. To be honest, I didn't even remember what they looked like. I tried texting my mom at a last-ditch effort to get out of it, but nope. The plane ticket was paid for, and I was already boarded. She argued back that I was exaggerating, that it was my papa's sister, so I would be fine, and to quit my complaining, or she'd shut my cell phone completely off as punishment. I strapped up and flew to Texas. I didn't get into the airport until late and was worried that they had forgotten about me. I get to the waiting area, and even though we were the only people there, save for one older Latino man, they were waiting with a sign plastered with my name on it. I gave a meek smile and wave, and they ran up excitedly, asking about my flight and whatnot. They were an older couple, older than I thought they were. Matching gray hair and oddly tall. They were both dressed like tourists, with the Hawaiian dress shirts and khakis, and Rick had shades on with a safari hat, even though we were inside. I figured they were just weird old people, and brushed it off. We arrived back to their house, a really nice one in a rich senior living area, and Pat showed me around the house and had to spare the room which would be mine, and left me be. I instantly called my boyfriend, let him know I'd landed safely, and told him about the flight and how weird my relatives were. Since I was off on my sleeping schedule, I ended up sleeping in until noon the next day. I groggily rolled out of bed and walked downstairs to get breakfast. I was met with a note on the fridge explaining that they were both at the store and would be back soon. I ate, showered, got dressed, and waited. They pulled up shortly after and whisked into the house with a huge bag. Aunt Pat grinned and handed me the sack. "We got you a little present. We're both just so excited you're here." I opened it up to reveal a hideous Star-Spangled Banner dress with accompanying hairpieces. It was so horrendous, but as rude of a teen as I wasn't point-blank disrespectful. I gave them both a huge smile and thanks. Rick pulled out the dress and let it unfold in its ugly glory. "We walk in the summer parade every year, and we want you to walk with us. Our roundabout is flag-themed this year. Why don't you try it on, make sure it fits?" Weirdly, it fit just fine, much to their delight. The parade was in 3 days, and until then, we would do some sightseeing around Texas. For those 3 days, I was completely ill-tempered. Everything they were doing was making me want to scream. I was so annoyed and irritable. They drone on about one thing, argue off tangent about another, and they had a rigorous schedule that my teenage body did not want to keep up with. Waking up very early to go on a snail's pace walk, quick to bed at night with no TV, just basic old people lifestyle. But to a teen, it was hell. All of the tourist spots they took me to were very bland, and I was not in the mood to be appreciative. Whether they were starting to get annoyed with me or not, they never showed it. I wouldn't have cared if they were anyway. I figured they'd just send me home early if I did get on their nerves enough with my moodiness. The big day comes around, and I'm garbed up in my outfit, ready to die of humiliation. The parade was pretty long, walking about 3 miles through the neighborhood. I half waved and fake smiled the entire way through, then followed the giant barbecue, which went on until late at night. Aunt Pat told me to stick close to them and to not wander off since I'd get lost pretty quick. About an hour of being glued to them, they started to keep less of an eye on me and focused on their friends. I walked off to get some food and decided to keep walking. It was a nice night and felt good to get some fresh air and freedom. I watched some kids play with the sparklers, adults laughing loudly and spilling their beer, and started to feel a bit better. I kept strolling on, having a good time people watching, when I saw 2 little girls sprint across the street a couple blocks down from me, waving sparklers. I grinned, thinking about my own little sisters, when I noticed a weird shadow just beyond where the kids had ran. My smile dropped, and I froze, peering harder to make out what it was. The shadow moved quickly, following where the girls did. I figured that it was just their parent, but the hair standing on the back of my neck said otherwise. I decided there wasn't any harm in following it, just to make sure my subconscious was wrong, and jogged down the street. I made it to where I saw the girls run by and looked down the road to check if I could see them. There was a little play structure at the end of the street for the neighborhood kids to play on, and I guess they probably ran down there to play. I made it to the park and heard giggles coming from the tube slide and a small pile of burnt-out sparklers on the ground below the entrance. I glanced around quickly and didn't see anyone creepy. In fact, I didn't see a parent nearby. Knowing if my sisters did this, my mom would be livid. It was dark out, no one around for at least 5 blocks before the party, and it was getting cold and late. I made my presence known, not to scare kids, and pretended to get a phone call so they could hear my voice and know I was a girl and hopefully someone they could trust. "Oh, hey, yeah, I'm down at the little park waiting for you. See you soon." The giggles stopped and little faces peered out. They couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. I waved hello to them and asked them if they were having fun. They nodded and clambered down. I know how to talk to little kids since I've been around them for so long, so they warmed up to me pretty fast. While playing with them for a little while, I asked where their parents were, if they knew where they lived. They ignored me and continued to drag me around to play games. "I really like your dress. It looks like mine. My grandma got it for me." One of them did a quick spin for me to show off her bedazzled flag dress. I remembered then that all the cul-de-sacs were themed, and figured they had to live in one of the houses around Aunt Pat's. I asked if they walked around in the parade, and they nodded, and went off telling me about how fun riding the float was. We had a big flag float on our section, so they must have been on it, and I didn't see them since I spent most of my time zoned out. As I was playing Super Sleuth, I saw a shadow move from down the street towards the park. I got the heebie-jeebies again, and kept my eyes on it. The girls had crawled back into the slide during this, and were trying to get me to catch them. Something came over me, and I told them to keep quiet for just a little bit, that we were going to play a joke on someone. They loved the idea, thank God, and cupped their hands to their mouth with big grins. By this time, the shadow figure was within the lamppost that illuminated the park, and I could see them clearly. He looked like a normal guy, middle-aged, just slightly disheveled. As he got closer to me though, the worse I felt. I was sitting on the swing, acting like I was texting when he came up to me.
Have you seen my girls anywhere? I lost them at the parade.
He peered around the playground quickly.
I hoped they'd come here to play.
He trailed off and gave me a nervous laugh. His story seemed to add up, but then again, the girls only mentioned a grandma. Oh, no, I haven't, but I could keep an eye out for them. What are their names? This was the true test, since the girls had already told me their names during me quizzing them.
Emma and, Ava. 2 little girls, blonde. Haven't seen them?
Wrong. Their names weren't even close to what he just bullshitted out. My creepometer shot up. I shook my head no, apologized, and went back to my phone. Since Aunt Pat was tech illiterate, she doesn't text, which left me stuck waiting on this dude to leave so I could call her and explain what was happening. Instead, he decides to pop a squat down on the swing next to me. Great. He starts to make small talk with me, asking where I lived around here, what my name is, if I had a boyfriend. I kept my answers short, making up a fake name, saying my dad was coming soon to get me. His questions were starting to get more personal. If I was on my period, how old I was, if I was a virgin. I snapped at him and asked why he was bothering me when he should be looking for his kids. That's when I saw the knife. He shifted in the swing and his shirt went up, revealing a huge knife clipped to his pocket. I tried acting like I didn't see it, and as I pulled out my phone to text my boyfriend to call 911, the guy snatched my cell. He kept asking for my passcode, wanting to see if I had any nudes on my phone. I was scared to piss him off and worried if I started yelling it would scare the girls into making noise. I started acting like I was into him, keep him calm, hopefully get him away from the kids long enough for me to get help in some fashion. I laughed and said I didn't have nudes, but he insisted on getting my passcode. It was some random 4-digit number, and it locked him out of my phone. I claimed it was some random 4-digit number, and it locked him out of my phone. He tossed it back to me and told me my phone was busted. He then got up and asked me to come help him look for his girls, that it would be a faster search if I did. He pointed off down the street he had come up from and insisted they must have gone that way. I stood up slowly, trying to stall and figure out what to do, but he slipped an arm around my waist and herded me off. Maybe I should go the opposite way, cover more ground. I tried to peel away from him, but his grip was tight.
No, they went this way. No use splitting up.
He kept coming up with excuses to keep me there, and I was terrified of what would happen if he got mad, so I stayed quiet. His hand kept trailing down to my ass and groping it, and it took every ounce of my being not to break into sobs right there. I felt so stupid. What was my plan? I left the girls alone. I'm alone with a crazy person, and no one knows where either of us are. Then I hear the sweet sound of sandals slapping on pavement. And a booming voice yell out, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" Uncle Rick had come to save the day. He was running down the sidewalk towards me as fast as a 75-year-old man can, which apparently is pretty fast. The guy suddenly let go of me and whipped out his knife, aiming at Rick. I ran away and started yelling at my uncle that he had a knife. Apparently my aunt and uncle both have concealed weapon permits, and why wouldn't they? It's Texas. He whipped out his handgun and starts yelling at me to get back. The man's eyes grow wide, and he throws his knife in Rick's direction and turns to run and hop the fence, and keeps on running through someone's yard and kept going. Rick lowers his gun and ushers me to him, and I started choking out what happened between sobs. He kept his cool the entire time and wrapped me in a big bear hug. We went back to the park, and I crawled inside the tube to find the little girls curled up at the bottom together, asleep. Rick called Aunt Pat, and I woke the kids up, congratulating them on staying quiet so well. We all clamber out when Aunt Pat shows up in the car. I got a good lecture from her, and so did the girls. Apparently Aunt Pat knew them and their grandma, and loaded us up and took us back to the barbecue, which was now shut down and replaced with a search party and police. The girls ran back to Grandma, and I had to explain what happened to the police and give a description of the guy. Turns out they've had multiple calls on him for hovering around the playground and following kids home from the bus stop. They were surprised when I said Rick hadn't shot the guy, just scared him. The cop turned to my uncle and asked why he didn't, and Rick gestures to me. She's from Oregon, didn't want to make her liberal ass shit itself. The next day, Aunt Pat woke me up early and drove me to a gym where she then paid for a trainer to give me self-defense lessons for the rest of the time I was in Texas. After the incident, I was much less of a dickhead teen and did a 180 on my mood. Aunt Pat didn't even call to tell my mom, saying there was no point in worrying her if we've handled it. I don't know if they ever caught the creep, but I definitely have the skill set now to handle him if I ever run into him or someone alike again. I just hope I never do. I'll leave being a badass to Uncle Rick and Aunt Pat. The doctor told me it was a figment of my imagination, a hallucination, a phantom limb, cut off, but the ghost of a feeling remains. The doctor tutted and prescribed me a different pill. I have lost count of how many pills I've tried. There was the yellow one, and the red and white capsule, and the green one, and they have succeeded in giving me incontinence, nausea, and hair loss, but they haven't taken my girl away. My doctor told me to talk about it, tell people. Who the hell am I supposed to tell something like this? My last friends abandoned me when Sylvia left. It's late here. Where to start when there is so much to tell? At the beginning, I suppose. It's always a good place. We thought we'd had it made when we moved into the suburbs. We had well-paying jobs. Fluke or competence had saved us when the waves of cuts hit around 2010. For once in our lives, money wasn't a problem. 8 years earlier, we had Annabelle, Belle for short. She was our little angel. Parents out there will know. A child shifts the center of gravity of your life. The move was good for her, good for us, away from the hustle and danger of the city, busy streets, missing children, the sticky hands and staring eyes of sexual predators. It wasn't the house of our dreams, but it was close enough. A lawn for the balmy summer months, fireplace for the chill of winter, space for us to grow into, especially for a young girl. It came fully furnished, and it was a steal, a distress sale, our agent called it. At least a tenth of what a similar property would set us back. The euphoria and novelty lasted me until the first night. Sylvia was asleep next to me. The moonlight sparkled off the fine hairs on her bare shoulder. We shared a celebratory drink after dinner, and then another after that. I was lying in bed, basking in the warm glow of alcohol when I first heard it. My first thought was rats. That was exactly what it sounded like, the little tap dance of tiny claws on hard wood coming from the walls. The delicate snoring from next to me told me that Sylvia was undisturbed by the scratching noise coming from the walls. I flinched as my bare feet touched the cold floor. The floorboards groaned in protest as I padded across the room like an overweight ninja. The tapping paused at the first creak of the floorboards, then resumed. The rough weave of the wallpaper under my palm as I leaned in to track the pitter-patter behind the walls. The scampering sounds eluded me. Every time I attempted to track the rats, The sounds seemed to come from another part of the room. My knees grew sore from pressure. I wasn't some young child at a playground. I was a grown man, and my weight pressed down on the bony points of my kneecaps. Out of desperation, I put my ear to the wall, hoping that the source of the little noises would reveal itself to me. I was only met with a stubborn silence. Or almost a stubborn silence. On the edge of my hearing, so quiet that I had to strain my ears to pick it up, a child's laughter from inside the walls. I did not speak of the incident. I spent more time trying to convince myself that there hadn't been that childish giggle. Wind, perhaps, the rattle of a toy. Not a rattle, maybe one of those few fangled dolls with the soulless eyes and microchip voice. There was a change in her, like the heavy air you can smell before a thunderstorm. She was a little quieter than usual. A strange environment will do that to a kid. A little withdrawn, Sylvia didn't really notice. I suppose I'd always been more observant than her. Belle started looking tired, dark crescents appearing under her light hazel eyes. She wasn't getting much sleep. My first instinct was to blame the rats in the walls. Who wouldn't? They got louder and louder as the days went by. The damn things were keeping me up at night. Almost as though the cursed rodents were hurling themselves bodily against my walls, the thumping started sounding eerily like footsteps. I was not about to be defeated by a group of jumped-up rats in my own house. Fueled by testosterone-induced rage, I waged war. I tried glue traps, I tried poison, I tried cages. Nothing worked. I asked Sylvia about it, but she seemed oblivious to the late-night disturbances. That woman could sleep through a hurricane. I asked Belle if the noise was keeping her up at night. Sylvia was over in the living room watching TV while Belle and I did the dishes. She just looked up with those big eyes of hers. The other children want to come in and play, but they can't open the door. The girl always had an overactive imagination, but this one hit a little too close to home for me. I felt the unfamiliar prickle of goose flesh on my arm. "You mean the door to the house?" I asked, keeping my tone deliberately playful. It was just a game, just another of her little games. I had imaginary friends at her age. Why should my own child have been any different? "No, Daddy, the door behind the cupboard." We were up in her room. The opening theme from Desperate Housewives floated up through the floorboards, a world away. I thought I'd humor my little girl, but there was something deathly serious in her tone that I could not shake. I reached back around the standalone wardrobe and felt nothing more than a smooth paint on the wall. "There's no door here, honey." "Look closer," she insisted. I held up my cell phone for light, still playing along. There was something strange in that palm width of space between the cupboard and the wall. A discoloration of the wall, perhaps. Something darker in the shade of the wardrobe. The hard edges of the wardrobe bit into the soft flesh of my fingers. I put my back into it, and the piece of furniture gave ground, grudgingly. And there it was, a door behind the wardrobe. Just as Belle had said. Not any door, though. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface of the wall, just a painted one. So convincing were the brush strokes on that door that I had touched the wall again to tell myself that it wasn't real. "How'd you know this was here, baby bear?" I asked. "The other children told me." "From school?" As far as I knew, she hadn't brought friends home before. "No, Daddy, the children from behind the door," she said. I looked into her tawny eyes, hoping to spot some twinkle of mischief there. There was nothing there but an innocent earnestness. I lay in bed that night, studying the cracks on the ceilings. My heart pounded hard in my chest, a heavy bass line above the distant rumble of the heating. My daughter's words had unsettled me in a strange way that I could not pinpoint. It felt off somehow, like a surrealist painting, one tiny detail throwing my carefully ordered world into disarray. I took deep breaths, trying to drive away the strange tight fear in my chest. The odd painted door, a mural of some sort. Why was it still there when the bedroom had been so clearly repainted? The thumping of the rats in the walls sounding so much like little footsteps. "The children from behind the door," she said. I rubbed at my forearms vigorously, trying to press the goosebumps back into my own skin. That's when the thumping started again. Not rats, I realized. Not rats at all. Footsteps. The light bounce of a child. I crept up to my wall again, pressing my ear against the wallpaper. There was a laughter there, soft and faint. Not the laughter of a single child. Children. Their happy footfalls beating a rough drum beat on the wooden door. There was someone else in there with my daughter. My heart jumped. I felt the chill in my veins as I rushed out of my room and tore down the corridor. The silvery light of the moon shone through the window. It gave everything an odd, flat look, without contrast. Belle's room was only a few feet from the door to our bedroom, but my chest heaved with deep, body-shaking breaths. I could still hear them faintly through the door, the thud of feet on the floor. I steeled myself. It was nothing. Sound traveled strangely through these old houses. Echoes, maybe. She was just talking to herself in her sleep. The stress of moving, perhaps. Suitably calmed, I turned the doorknob slowly. There was a conspiratorial shush from the other side of the door, and silence descended like a shroud. I gave the door a gentle push. The room was dark and quiet. The moonlight crept into the room. My daughter was standing there, just behind the door. I still figure against the dark background. The shock took the strength from my legs. I backed away a little quicker than I meant to. She just stood there, swaying slightly. Thin, white crescents showed from under her hooded eyelids. Her lips were moving, almost soundlessly. I leaned forward, straining to make out what she was saying. It slowly became clear. One sentence over and over. "All the doors are open now. All the doors are open." And from behind her, in the shadowed room, the quiet click of a door shutting. Belle didn't recall a thing the next morning. She could sense my frustration and fear as I quizzed her about the night before. Dark circles framed puzzled eyes in her pale face. She hadn't slept well last night either. Sylvia took her to school. I hadn't broached the topic with Sylvia yet. There was still some time before I had to leave for the office. I crept back to my daughter's room, feeling like a thief in my own empty house. I stood in front of that strange painted door for the second time in as many days. I ran my fingers around its edges, remembering the strange sound of the door shutting from the night before. Its edges were wholly contiguous with the wall. I pulled the wardrobe out further, putting my entire frame between the wardrobe and the door, and leaning into it. There was no give, no yielding of the door. It was just painted over a wall, as solid as any other. I was about to go when I heard an unfamiliar rasp under my foot. The floor was gritty with some kind of dust. I knelt down and pinched some of the dust up between two fingers. "All the doors are open now." My daughter's dreamy voice in my ear, my memory of it so sharp that it seemed that she was right there whispering it. How odd it was for the dust to be pink. Of course it would be. It wasn't dust at all. It was paint. Paint from the wall. Things didn't get better. The gambling footsteps continued at night, unabated. That, and the whispers and the giggles at night. Whatever was in my daughter's room toyed with me. It never let Sylvie hear it. I would stay up, waiting to wake my wife up just in time to hear it, only to be met with stubborn silence. Trickery wouldn't work either. We stayed up late to catch a DVD long into the small hours of the night, but the house remained quiet. The laughter from the next room was always tantalizingly distant, the happy sounds of children at play as though from a great distance. Too great a distance to be in the next room to mine. Belle was in high spirits, but she was wasting away. Sylvia hadn't noticed it yet, but I felt it in the sharp bones of her shoulders pressing into my arms when I hugged her, or her skinny arms that I could almost encircle with my thumb and forefinger. I received an email from her teacher mentioning that Belle still wasn't integrating well at school. He said that Belle was perpetually tired in class, and Belle had blamed late-night games of tag and hide-and-seek with her friends for her tiredness. "You need to exercise more control over your girl," he said. I had to know what was going on. Sylvia was already asleep. The nightly visits hadn't started yet. I slid into Belle's room silently, an open packet of flour in my hand. I scattered it all around the floor, taking care not to step into the flour myself. I lay back in my bed with a sigh, waiting for the sounds to start. Sleep took me unexpectedly, but what little I had was fitful and restless. I woke with a snort at first light. It was Saturday, and it would be some time yet before the rest of the world woke. I stretched under the covers, my back popping satisfyingly. I blinked the sleep from my eyes. The flour. I had to check the flour. I swung my feet off the bed and planted them on the floor, right next to a pair of white speckled footprints, just where they would be if someone was standing over my bed, staring at me. The damnable chill stole the warmth of the morning sun from my skin. My hands clenched and unclenched spastically like dying spiders. I stared at the trail of flour-marked footprints from the open door. How long had she stood there, in the dark, watching me sleep? I wondered. I stood up on my shaky legs, my hand on the wall to support myself down the corridor. Belle's door was ajar. It swung open silently. The sound of deep breathing told me that Belle was still asleep. There was a bug. There was but a single set of footprints, just starting from her bed, where her feet would have landed if she got off. No multiple footprints, just a single set from my daughter. Typical somnambulism, perhaps. The stress of the move, the new school could have brought it on. She'd never sleepwalked before, but who knew what dark things lurked in her psyche? I heaved a sigh of relief, chastising myself for a week's worth of irrationality. How reassuring the illusion of normalcy in our lives and how quickly it shatters. Not with a roar or a flash, with something simple. Something simple like my daughter's shoe bouncing off my toe as I tried to leave the room. Flipping once, twice, and coming to rest next to a hollow in the flour on the floor. The size, the shoe, the prints. It didn't fit. It didn't match. Whatever had gotten off the bed had stood next to me that night before. It wasn't Belle. After that cruel prank, the noises at night returned unabated. The strangeness started to leak. The night was no longer its sole province. I was waiting for Belle outside the upstairs toilet another Saturday morning when I heard the familiar taunting voices start up over the sound of the shower. A chorus of children's voices saying something with a strange cadence, a chant almost. Stay. They seemed to say, stay, stay, stay. They were in there. There was no way for them to escape. I found the door unlocked. I turned the knob, braced my legs, and threw the door open. And found nothing. Hot water still gushed from the shower head. Steam billowed out into the cooler air of the corridor. No one was there. I had seen her go in. I would have wagered my life on it. And yet, she was gone. The giggling started again, coming down the corridor, mocking. Her room. I bolted down the corridor. I found her there, a towel wrapped around her bare body, staring at me with cold mirth from her bed. Her dripping hair had left a trail of water on the wooden floor, a trail which led to the wall with the painted door. I felt her eyes trailing me as I left the room. I shut the shower off, looking for how my own daughter and the voices had escaped the tiny toilet. It took a minute, like the picture with the young lady that turned into an old crone. The answer was right there in front of me, sketched out between the tiles in front of me in bold strokes of dark mildew, was the vague outline of a door. It was another sleepless night. I thought long and hard about trying to explain everything to Sylvia, It sounded crazy. There were doors in the walls, doors that our daughter had walked through, doors let in something strange into our house. Something that wanted her to stay. The thought lingered in the back of my head like a suppurative scab, itchy and red and raw. Sleep would not come easy. I was contemplating a little chemical assistance to aid me along my way when I grew aware of a soft sliding sound. Movement caught my eye. I saw a slim figure slowly shuffle by the door to our bedroom. "Belle?" I called out to her softly. She didn't break step. And what step it was. A stiff-armed, stiff-legged march down the corridor, her feet scraping over the wooden floor. "Belle?" I called out a little louder. There was no response. I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. The door to the toilet clicked shut softly. I followed. The lights revealed an empty corridor. The toilet door yielded with a squeak of complaint. The silence was thick and cloying. It seemed that no sound would carry through the air. The light clicked to life in the toilet. Shadows leapt and danced with its first few flickers. The shower curtain swayed. The draft I had let in when I opened the door, I told myself. It did not help. I chided myself for my childish fears, but the flutter in my gut remained. I yanked the curtain aside, roughly. My other hand balled into a fist to protect myself. From what? My daughter? Nothing awaited me on the other side of the curtain. Nothing but that strange outline of a door, etched out in lines, the tiles. I heaved a sigh of relief. Perhaps the lack of sleep was getting to me, my fears spilling over into waking dreams. The calm was short-lived. I heard another door slam shut, downstairs. A series of childish titters carried up through the floorboards. I bolted downstairs. Again, the lights revealed nothing. Almost nothing. The huge throw rug that had come with the furnished house had been tossed aside. There, hidden under it, was another door, scratched into the parquet flooring. I felt sick to my stomach, thinking of the days we'd spent on the couch, with our feet on that hideous thing. I ran my fingers around the thin grooves of the scratch marks. The door felt cool to the touch, cooler than the surrounding wood. The same feel of a front door, guarding against the winter chill. Whatever it was that the door guarded against, it was cold. Very cold. The laughter started again, taunting, mocking. I heard the creak of my daughter's footsteps on the stairs to the basement. The light of the living room seemed to shy away from the depths of the basement. I could make out Belle's outline, just where the light of the living room met the darkness of the basement. The light switch was at the foot of the stairs. The steps sang under my weight. Belle didn't turn around. I reached out to grab her shoulder. Her bony shoulder was icy cold. I pulled her towards me. I could just nearly see her face. Something blotted out the light. I blinked at the silhouette at the top of the staircase. "Daddy, why are all the lights on?" Belle's voice. Oh God, Belle was at the top of the staircase. I felt the light caress of fingers on my hand. The girl in front of me, her fingers on mine. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, as though forced from a throat long turned to dust. "She's ours now." She giggled and twisted away from my grasp, vanishing into the dark. The dark space under the house suddenly filled with the patter of feet on the dusty floor. 2 pairs, 3 pairs, until it seemed that an entire legion of light feet were dancing across the floor. The sound was deafening in that confined space. I reached forward and thumbed the light switch, only to be greeted by silence and the slowly settling dust. Something was wrong with the wall again. I already knew what to expect. With a sweep of my hand, I cleared the dust from the wall. Just as I expected, another door. This one, a huge set of double doors, painted on the wall with garish colors. Just before I left the basement, I saw the clean circles on the floor where the opening door had swept the dust away. We had to go. There was something dark in the house, something wholly unnatural about those strange painted doors. I sprinted up the stairs, grabbed some clothes. I told Belle as I passed her. I did not stop to see if there was a shred of understanding in her blank eyes. She turned and followed me silently upstairs. I shook Sylvia awake roughly. 4 weeks to the day we moved in and we were fleeing our own home. She blinked the sleep from her eyes. In hushed tones, I tried to explain the situation to her. The painted doors, the sounds of the children, the danger we were all in. Her expression slowly changed from sleepy bewilderment to one of disbelief and annoyance. She told me that I was overreacting, that the stress of the move and our job was taking its toll on me. We would talk about it in the morning, she said. Get help from a doctor if we needed to. I grew increasingly agitated at her apathy. I begged her to humor me for just one night, for our family to shift to a motel for a single evening. Our conversation grew heated. All this was cut short when Belle reappeared at our doorway. Her hair was wild, her eyes burning with some inner fire. You should go now. All the doors are closing soon. I must stay with them. Her voice was toneless, the flat delivery of an atheist reciting a litany. Sylvia gaped, having her daughter acting as strangely as her husband tipped her over the edge. Weeping, she rushed forward and held Belle close to her. You're not going anywhere. This isn't real. Daddy's sick. He's made you sick too. You and I will get away from here. Get away from Daddy. Those words felt like physical blows. I felt sick. My wife started pulling at Belle's hands, trying to move her. Belle stood fast, and there was nothing my wife, with her advantages in strength and weight, could do to shift her an inch. Sensing their prey about to evade them, the things in the house grew restless. Our room filled with the sound of feet on the floor, the sound of little feet running up and down the corridors. With a squeak, Sylvia pulled the door shut and leaned against it. The door shuddered on its hinges as unseen things flung themselves against it. Unsuccessful, the house grew silent. Sylvia stared at the doorknob. I shook my head, stepping off the bed. I had just gotten onto my feet when a new horror showed itself. Our wall was stretching, distending like a boil, bulging obscenely towards us. There was a door in our room, under the wallpaper. It had been there all along. Sylvia began to sob, big, hiccuping sobs of fear. We heard the tearing sound of the glue ripping off the walls. The blister on the wall took shape. I saw the hard edge of the door pressing, straining against the wallpaper. And behind that, the sharp points of fingers pressing against outwards. Many, many pairs of hands, and then a rip. A pale finger burst through the thick wallpaper. It hooked downwards and began to tear at the fabric. Sylvia and I were transfixed by the sight, paralyzed by fear. Sylvia screamed as Belle tore herself free from her mother's grasp. Belle took a step forward and placed her hand on the light switch. In that moment, I saw my daughter again, for the last time. Her eyes sparkled with tears. Don't look. You don't want to see them. I love you. With a flick of her wrist, she plunged the room into total darkness. The sound of the wallpaper ripping was very loud. The temperature in the room fell. It felt larger somehow, that we weren't in a bedroom of our home anymore, but in some vast and empty space. A chill wind blew, and it smelt of dry dust. When the wind died down, we were alone in our room. Our girl was gone. What is there left to say after that? We did what we could. We moved into a motel. The police came. They looked for prints, they asked questions, they took pictures. They broke down the walls behind the doors with their hammers. Nothing. The detectives came. They asked more questions, hard questions sometimes. They took me away for a while. The doctors came. They cajoled and counseled. They asked me about my parents, about our family, if I had ever hurt my daughter. The doctors found nothing wrong with me. The cops found nothing in my house. The detectives found nothing false in our story. They let me go. Sylvia and I stayed with her parents for a month. Belle's disappearance ripped a hole in our lives. We tried. Some things just don't heal right. Others don't heal at all. Things weren't the same. The split was amicable. We just drifted. No arguments, no fights. just a slow death of the love that had once bound us. And what then? I came back here. There was nowhere else I could go. The first night was the hardest. The bedroom was out of the question. I spent the first night on the couch, hugging a bottle of Jack. It was midnight when the laughter woke me. They were still there, in the house. Through the tinkling of the laughter, I could pick out just a single voice. A father never forgets the voice of his child. The doors were gone, but they were still there. She was still there. I'll stop here for the night. I can hear her again. She sounds happy. I lost my family to the deep web. Allow me to just preface this by saying that I never used the deep web for anything too bad. I never bought drugs, I never stole movies or music. Hell, I rarely even looked at porn. I had the most generous wife you could ever imagine. I honestly didn't need porn with a woman like that in my life. I had always been fascinated by computers, but the town I grew up in was a small hick town, if that. I remember hearing about computers and the internet, and the idea of it honestly blew me away. Being able to access information from anywhere in the world was amazing, and it astounded me that it wasn't embraced and pursued by more people. So, I not only lived in a technology desert, but my family wasn't exactly rich either. My mom slaved away at a large corporation where she was paid much less than she was worth. My dad worked various odd jobs, but always invested most of his time into the local church. He was a stereotypical Bible thumper, and, as one might expect, I grew to resent the religion. I always felt like religion was a one-way street. They expected me to pray to and serve some imaginary deity in the sky, and all those who don't would burn in hell. My interest in history led me to the realization that every religion was similar in that regard, and that, for me, was enough to dismiss them all. Thankfully, they raised my sister and I to work hard. We both went to college and got decent jobs. She became a nurse and moved to New York. I followed my passion for history and eventually became a world history teacher at a well-paying high school in a suburb of Tennessee, not too far from where I grew up. I married my high school sweetheart shortly after getting my teaching job, and things could not have been better. We found a nice house that was close enough to both of our jobs. My wife and I had been saving up money because we were trying to have a child, although it was taking longer than we thought. After about a year of trying, we saw a doctor. He said that we were both able, but it would take some more time. This was almost nice in a way, because we did have more money than we needed for when the baby came. I decided to take a few $100s and get that computer I'd been dreaming about for years. I was so excited when my wife agreed that I should. We couldn't raise a kid in this day and age without a computer, after all, right? Well, I put it in our home office, and I quickly became enamored with my computer. I can honestly say that my life would have been so much better if I'd had one of these growing up. I could literally learn anything in the world I wanted. I found myself reading dozens of articles, speeches, books, and watching tutorials. I could not have been happier. Time marched on, and I found myself finishing up the semester and getting ready for the summer. It was pretty boring, honestly. I still got paid for it, but because the school was such a crappy district, there weren't many things for teachers to get involved in over the summer. That was when my genuine interest in the internet became something of an addiction. I was on that thing at nearly all hours of the day. Since my wife and I were still trying to have a baby, we were having sex like two animals. Life could not have gotten any better. Unfortunately, when things get that good, they can only get worse. It was a month and a half through the summer vacation when I found myself reading the same shit on the internet. There was nothing new, or at the very least, nothing worth learning about. However, I did recall hearing about something strange. It was called the deep web. I never studied it in depth, but I eventually had a basic understanding of it. I downloaded Tor and started looking around online. I made sure to be extra careful because I have heard stories of people being stalked, kidnapped, or even killed from using the deep web. I found myself staring at dozens of random links on the hidden wiki at 3 o'clock in the morning. I kept clicking away until anything useful came up. I did end up finding a lot of mathematics and science stuff, but I'm a history teacher. I'd rather learn about history. A few more hours of searching and I found something that at least remotely piqued my interest. It was a conspiracy theory page. Now, I don't consider myself to be anything of a conspiracy theorist, nor am I the least bit paranoid about things like the Illuminati. But these were some of the most solid arguments for foul play from the government I had ever seen. There were classified documents, in-depth research, and an overwhelming amount of evidence for almost every theory I saw. Don't get me wrong, there were a few that seemed a bit far-fetched, but the vast majority of them made some damn good arguments. Eventually, I couldn't hold my eyes open any longer, and I had to go to bed. I powered down my computer, and as quiet as a mouse, crawled into bed with my tender, loving wife. I felt a bit of a void between us though. She never had the lust for knowledge like I did, and if I were to tell her about the crazy and interesting things I read online, she'd playfully tease me that she was falling asleep or something to that effect. The next day, I was right back on the deep web looking for new things to widen my world's view. Nearly an hour had gone by, and all I found was a bunch of broken links. I was about to sign off when a box appeared in the corner of my screen with a link in it. Being as naive as I was, I clicked on it. I was absolutely mortified at what I saw next. At first glance, I thought the abomination on my computer screen was some kind of a torture video. No, I was dead wrong. A toddler whimpered as he sat there gagged and bound, covered in blood and piss. He begged the man in frame to stop, but to no avail. A deranged man in a Guy Fawkes mask stared at the camera as he thrusted his body to and fro. A few seconds went by when the man finished, and he got up to do a strange dance. If there was a cross between a football player's victory dance and a circus clown's opening act, the resulting atrocity might resemble the strange act the man performed over the child. To my horror, I realized it was a live feed hooked up to a webcam with a live chat box on the inside. It took a few minutes for the shocking realization to fully wash over me. After I'd collected myself, I foolishly started to read what was in the live chat box. The most horrid and disgusting things you can imagine were being requested. I had a hard time believing that real people were behind a keyboard somewhere in the world typing these things. I really don't want to go into too much more detail about what they were saying. It suddenly dawned on me that I could just close this shit and be over with it. I jolted the mouse and clicked to X out of the page, but nothing happened. I felt my stomach drop. What the hell was going on? I kept asking myself. I'd never heard about anything like this happening. I was about to manually reboot my computer when the man on the video stream called out my full name.
Leaving so soon, John Edwards. Off to teach another lesson at that little shithole you call a high school.
He asked in a smug tone. I had no idea what to do. I clicked every button on the computer, keyboard, and mouse. No matter what I did, there was no reaction. I heard him start reading off my credit card information, and I'd had enough. I unplugged my computer from the back and powered it down. It was a relief to have finally left that nightmare of a web page. I was in awe at the speed he was able to get my personal information. I changed my credit card number and any other information I could. My wife was a bit suspicious, but she didn't pry too much at it. We had a very trusting relationship, and I didn't want to frighten her, so I kept the incident to myself. A few days went by, and I didn't even go into my office. I left my computer in there, unplugged, admittedly scared to turn that damn thing on ever again. I knew I'd eventually have to face my fear, so I entered my office. I booted her up, and everything seemed to be normal. I deleted Tor and made sure to be done with that deep web shit. I casually loaded up Google Chrome, and everything seemed to be perfectly fine. Nothing seemed to come to fruition from my little mishap, and decided I was going to be safe after all. Oh, how wrong I was. About 5 months later, my wife's sister ended up moving in. She really was such a pleasant woman, and we did have extra space, so we decided to allow her to stay with us. It was just a few weeks later that my wife and I got the good news. She was pregnant. She was already a couple weeks in, and she and the baby were both healthy and in good shape. It was the best feeling in the world getting that news. I had gotten back into the swing of things with my job and occasionally reading some decent articles on the internet. We were expecting our precious baby girl in just a few days. I had completely forgotten about the events that had transpired the night I decided to use the deep web. It was a typical Sunday afternoon. I sat on my back porch drinking some cold sweet tea and listened to the hum of nature. Natural life can be so beautiful. Alone I sat in a serene peace, seemingly impenetrable from the vile world that lay outside the boundaries of my own little haven. That was when I heard a crash and screaming coming from my house. Immediately, I thought it was my sister-in-law watching TV too loud, which she had a tendency to do. But then I heard my wife sobbing uncontrollably. Panic sunk into my heart and I dashed into the house. I entered the large living room just in time to see a large masked man slit my wife's throat. I screamed at him, but he didn't even acknowledge my existence. I was screaming uncontrollably and ran toward him with intent to kill. I smashed a glass lamp over his head, but he didn't even flinch. I was questioning if he had even felt it or not. He turned around and grabbed me by my throat. He lifted me up off the ground and brought my face close to his.
"You thought I forgot about you, boy."
I instantly recognized him as the man from the deep web livestream I saw all those months ago. That was the last thing I remember before waking up. I awoke to saw my sister-in-law's mangled corpse on the floor. It looked like she'd been cut in fucking half. To my horror, I saw my beloved wife's body there, drenched in blood. I sobbed uncontrollably for some time. I'm still not sure how much time had passed while I knelt there and sobbed. Time may very well have stood still for all I knew, or cared. But after I composed myself, I noticed something strange about my wife's corpse. Her stomach was not nearly as large as I had remembered it to be. I crawled over to her to analyze her body further. The wicked idea danced across my imagination. I pushed her on her side, and my hunch turned out to be true. That sick fucking bastard had cut my child out of my wife, and had taken it. It was certainly far long enough to have been born at this point. What the fuck was I going to do? I called the police, and the operator's apparent apathy toward the situation did nothing but anger me.
911, what's the emergency?
Someone killed my family, and I think they took my daughter. I frantically let out in a single breath. I continued to tell them my address.
We'll have someone over there as soon as we can.
The way she said that frustrated me. Here I am, sitting in a puddle of my family's blood. My life's been drastically changed forever, and she makes it seem as if it's just another day at the office. Where's the empathy? Where is the compassion for your fellow human being? After days of investigation and questioning, they were unable to find the killer or my daughter. I told those lazy fucking cops that this man found me and my family because I used the deep web, but because it was so long ago, I couldn't find the website again. They couldn't do anything about it. They called it a random act of heinous violence, and within 2 weeks, this story did make the local news, but nothing more happened than that. I guess it wasn't shocking enough. The whole incident was forgotten, and people were worrying about the next horrible thing. How could I live with myself after this? My entire family was dead because I was snooping around something I had no business to be partaking in. The following weeks were the worst of my life. I would drink as soon as I got up, and then drink all day. Alcohol was the only escape from this fucked up reality I had to live with. I was the shell of a human being, nothing more than a clusterfuck of negative, hideous emotions. Misery became my only company, but I had no one to be miserable with. I had to live this horrible fate alone.
Years had gone by when I looked into the mirror to see the unshaven face I had come to despise. Every day I thought about where my daughter might be. Maybe they sent her away to live with a nice, loving family across the country. I half-heartedly deluded myself. Deep down, I knew she was most likely raised in some human trafficking ring where she'd been beaten, raped, or even worse, in some hellhole filled with those sick fucks. I slowly made my way to my porch when I saw a familiar vehicle pull into my driveway. I could barely remember who it belonged to. When I saw his face, I instantly recognized him. It was my father. I hadn't seen him in years. "Son, I know you're hurting, but this is no way to live your life. Do you think you can move on?" I looked up at him, grimacing. "Do you think I'd be here doing this if I could move on?" He gave me a rough look and said that I needed to get revenge. He placed a revolver on the table in front of me, gave me a stern nod, and left. I was honestly shocked. This was the most religious man I'd known in my life who argued against killing of any kind. I didn't know if I could do it, but I started to think of how many people those bastards had done this to. I can't be the only one. So, if I were to theoretically go through with this, I'd really be doing the world a service. No, fuck that. I'm avenging my family, and I'm going to save my daughter. Over the next couple of days, I drained my bank account and purchased thousands of dollars in weaponry and ammunition. I quickly realized that there was a lot of illegal stuff that would come in real handy. I turned back to the deep web to buy spying equipment, heavy weapons, and explosives. It took about a month to gather enough supplies for my suicide mission, and as I sat in my basement with thousands of rounds of ammunition, pounds of explosives, and almost $20,000 in spying equipment, I knew I was going to wreak havoc on those sons of bitches once and for all. Days went by and I began to feel lethargic about the whole situation. I hadn't any idea of how I was going to find these people, or even if I could. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. 2 weeks went by of endless hours on the deep web, looking for the bastard who'd taken my family away from me. I came across something that seemed almost familiar in a way. It was another live stream of people torturing children. I felt a vile hatred rise up from the pit of my stomach. I knew this wasn't my guy, but I'd grown too impatient to wait any longer. If I can't find the needle in the haystack, I guess I'm just going to have to burn down the entire thing. I thought to myself with a hatred oozing from my pores. I made use of some spying equipment I bought and was able to figure out where these bastards were broadcasting from. An evil grin stretched across my face when I figured out they were right here in my own state. I loaded my car with a machine gun, an AK-47, and C4. I started my drive. This may have been the longest 2 hours in my life. I was so excited to finally kill some of these sick, disgusting people. After almost taking a wrong turn, I found the rusty old barn house the torture porn was being broadcasted from. There was surprisingly only a few people there. A total of 4 men were running this operation. I watched for a while, but they never came out of the barn house. With my AK-47 in hand, I made my way to the entrance. I could see them raping a small boy, no older than 12. He was crying hysterically and covered in blood. They were completely oblivious to me. I aimed my rifle's sight down. Admittedly, it took me a minute to actually pull the trigger. Actually pulling it was much harder than I would have thought. But seeing these sickos violate this defenseless child made me realize these people were really better off dead. I opened fire and screamed, "Fuck you!" as loud as my lungs would permit. From what I could tell, at least 2 of them were dead. 1 was shot but alive, and the 4th noticed quickly enough and got behind a truck. He had a pistol on him and fired back at me. This guy must have been legally blind or something because he missed pretty damn bad. Minutes went by, and I slowly crept around to the other side of the building. The one with the gun was screaming at the other one to get up, but he was clearly unable. I got as close to the other gunman as I could in preparation to kill him. I aimed my sight down, but I must have made a noise because he heard me. He spun around and shot. The bullet nearly grazed my skull. The gunshot was deafening. I ran toward him, expecting him to have had just fired his last shot. He had. I put a bullet through that motherfucker's head. I stood over his bloodied corpse for a brief minute. I wanted to spit on it, but I didn't want to leave any evidence for the cops, so I resisted the urge. I walked over to the bloodied one I shot earlier, laughing as I did. I placed my boot on his throat. He kept begging for his life, but there was a better chance of hell freezing over before I spared him. I made sure his last minutes on this earth were as miserable as possible. Glaring down at this sick man, I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew I was ridding the world of scum. Please, don't kill me. This wasn't my idea. What did you fucking say? You have the nerve to try and talk your way out of your inevitable death. How dare you? I pulled my leg back and in one swift motion, I kicked his skull in. His gray matter spilled all over the floor. The poor boy was sobbing uncontrollably. I pulled out my prepaid cell phone, dialed 911, and told them of the situation. I told the boy to forget about this night, and then I turned to walk away. The ride home seemed to drag on for hours. I'd heard so many things about having PTSD after killing people. So many articles online said that after killing someone, you'd almost always feel guilty, even if you knew you did the right thing. But the truth was, I didn't feel guilty at all. I felt powerful. More powerful than I'd ever felt in the years leading up to this day. I knew after I saw that babbling pile of shit beg for his life, that I was going to kill again. It felt so right to have someone begging for their life, and knowing that you weren't going to grant them their wish made it all the more satisfying. My life continued like that for many months. I'd spend almost all my free time on the deep web, trying to track down anything that could lead me to my daughter, and killing anyone I deemed worthy to die. I was like an over-the-top vigilante or something. Jesus, those were the days. Eventually, I became more involved in the private sector and started accepting payments to kill people. I'd gained enough notoriety in the criminal underworld that almost anyone knew who I was. I just wish I could go back in time and tell myself how much more money I could make by simply killing people. It makes me realize what a waste of my life teaching those hopeless dipshits really was. I was making chump change compared to what I make now. People apparently pay good money to have someone killed. I had already made just under $3 million in the past 6 months, and I don't even have to repeat the same monotonous lecture 7 times in a day. I almost became apathetic about ever finding my daughter again. She was most likely dead, or even worse. She could be anywhere in the world, and the odds of ever finding her were next to none, I thought. One day, a connection of mine told me he had a really good gig set up. He said that if I could kill 3 people well enough, I could become a regular for an underground overlord. For those of you that don't know, this was the kind of guy who had more money than God. He ran a lot of underground operations and even had a strong affiliation with the Silk Road before it got shut down. I knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I jumped at the chance. I went over the information. I immediately realized these were going to be the highest profiled people I would ever kill. When I discovered I was going to have to kill a family with a young child, I was mortified. The only people I've had to kill up until this point have been other criminals and sadists. How was I going to bring myself to take the lives of a seemingly innocent family? I would never even know why exactly I was being hired to kill them. You can't ask questions like that to the higher-ups. Anyone who did this was normally killed themselves, or at the very least, ostracized by the organization they were trying to work for. It was a pretty serious business I got myself into. I had no problem with that. I only did what I was told and nothing more. That was part of the reason I gained so much notoriety in my field. In fact, most people in this field never even got a chance to work for the Overlord. And if you're wondering why I keep referring to him as the Overlord, it's because he doesn't communicate with you directly. There are a lot of people looking for him, and he's responsible for billions in damage and the loss of countless innocent lives. Although they don't have a lot of information on him as of right now, and will probably never catch him. The next day, I was going to have to start tracking down this family I was ordered to kill, but that night, I was in a small bar in the middle of nowhere, drowning in alcohol like there was no tomorrow and contemplating how exactly I was going to bring myself to do this. I knew in the pit of my stomach that I wasn't a murderer. Well, let me rephrase that. Not a murderer of the innocent. I had no problem killing the evil men of the earth. I encountered so many sickos in my life. How could someone torture an animal or another person? I still couldn't bring myself to understand how anyone could do such a thing. Even if I found the man who kidnapped my daughter, I wouldn't torture him. I'd end his pathetic life, and I'd be done with it. Even after all the pain and agony that bastard put me through, I still knew I was better than him. I wouldn't become the monster I sought to destroy. The bar began spinning after my 5th shot, and I immediately came to regret this. I didn't feel threatened by the others in the bar before, but once I lost control of myself, it seemed as if I became all that much more paranoid. I became so much more vulnerable to those around me, and I couldn't die just yet. I knew the events that were soon to come would be life-altering. I had this great feeling about the next job and the opportunities it would bring, which is quite unusual. I never feel intuitive like this. With hopes of surviving until tomorrow, I drunkenly made my way back to the log cabin I was staying in. The snow and ice outside made it much more difficult to get there. As sad as it is to say, I ended up falling 3 times before I got back home and locked the door. It wasn't a far walk, but adding strong alcohol to any walk makes it seem like a journey around the entire globe. I laid down, and the thought of becoming the most powerful criminal in the world rushed through my mind before I went to the realm of the unconscious. The next morning, my ears were assaulted by the alarm I'd set on my phone. I downed a couple aspirins to cope with the headache and got to work. The family I was going to be attacking lived in a relatively populated area, and I knew if I was going to pull this off, it would have to be quiet. I sharpened 3 separate knives and placed them in my coat. The idea of bringing one of those blades across the neck of a little girl rushed through my mind and made me sick, but I knew that sacrifices were going to have to be made. Unfortunately, I'll never even know why I'm killing this family, but I did my best to separate myself from the idea that these were good people. They had to have done something pretty bad to have powerful criminals hiring hitmen to kill them. I drove my SUV to their neighborhood and parked down the street at 3 o'clock. Looking toward their backyard, I could see the father, Ronnie Williams, on the back porch. I knew I was going to have to kill him within the next half hour because the mother, Bridget Williams, would be picking up their daughter from school and would arrive home at 3:30, just like she did every day. I thought to myself how easy this job was to do since someone else had done the monotonous task of stalking these people and recording their schedule. I locked my vehicle and started walking toward the house. I knew where they kept their extra key in the front yard garden and made my way into the house from the front door. I waited for Ronnie to come back into the house for 10 minutes before I started to become impatient. I was going to need time to hide the body, I thought, and knew I needed to do this fast before Bridget and her daughter got home. I decided to push something over in the kitchen and hid behind the refrigerator as Mr. Williams slowly crept into the house, saying, "Hello?" I realized how truly inept this guy was by this. I waited until he came close enough and reached over to slice his throat open. He screamed. Much to my dismay, I tackled him and plunged the knife into his neck violently, nearly cutting his fucking head off. Watching the blood drip onto the floor drained me in some way. I sat over the lifeless body of a man who never saw me coming. I collected myself and dragged his body to the basement. I made sure to leave no evidence for the police to find. Making my way up the stairs, I heard the front door opening. I remember the blood all over the kitchen floor. Shit, I said to myself. I heard the woman and her daughter start screaming at the sight of the gruesome murder. I quickly rushed upstairs. Ma'am, I need you and your daughter to remain calm. I'm part of the FBI. I'm afraid a murderer has made his way into your house earlier this day, I said. I want to see some identification, the woman abruptly demanded. I pulled out my fake badge I always carried around and showed it to them. Anyone who knew anything about federal badges would easily detect it as a fake, but most people don't. Is my husband alright? She asked. I told her he was downstairs. She slowly made her way down the basement stairs, and I followed closely behind. When she located her husband, she fell to her knees and began sobbing. That was when I pulled out my knife and slit her throat from behind. She was dead within seconds. Now for the hard part, I thought to myself. I made my way back upstairs to find the little girl. She was nowhere in sight. I frantically looked all over the house, but she was nowhere to be found. I grew increasingly worried. I knew I was going to be watched by the Overlord, and if he saw this clear display of incompetence, it would hurt any chances I had of working for him. I began walking up the creaky wooded stairs to continue my search. I knew I heard a sound coming from behind the door. I slowly and quietly made my way toward it. I wrapped my hand around the shiny doorknob and began to turn. A large German shepherd jumped up on me, biting my arm. This caught me by surprise. I'd been wondering where the damn dog was. I struggled with the beast on top of me for a few minutes, but it was not long that I had my blade through its skin, and its blood soaking the cold, wooded floor. After composing myself, I continued my search for the girl. This girl was barely 6 years old, I thought. Where could she have gone? There were enough rooms in the house that this could take a while, but I knew the longer I was here, the worse it was for me. I checked each room in the house thoroughly, but found nothing. That was when I remembered the girl's father had built a fort for her in the backyard. That has to be where she is. I began outside and exited the back door to the porch. I saw that small makeshift door on the fort door was closed, and I knew I'd find her in there. I walked over and opened the door to the fort. She screamed as I forcefully pulled her out of the fort. All her energy was spent trying to free herself. I tried calming her down, but to no avail. She was crying and sobbing uncontrollably. I brought her back inside to finish the job. I threw her to the floor as I mentally readied myself to drive my knife through the little girl's heart. I could feel my own moral compass screaming at me to stop this madness. It was hard enough to kill the parents. How was I going to kill this daughter now, too? I closed my eyes and brought my knife close to her chest. She was screaming, but I did my best to distance myself from the situation as much as I could. I closed my eyes and began to focus. The screaming stopped, and I opened my eyes to see the lifeless corpse of the little girl oozing blood onto the floor. I started sobbing as the realization of my actions washed over me like a tidal wave of guilt and regret. I had to do it. I had to do it. I kept telling myself.
Yes, you did need to do it.
A strange voice exclaimed behind me. It sounded really familiar, but I had no idea where I heard it before. I turned around to see a large masked man standing behind me. He began to speak.
I know this whole ordeal has been difficult for you, killing your own daughter and such, but
What did you fucking say? This was my daughter? But my daughter's been dead for years, I said, cutting him off.
What do you think I did when I kidnapped her from you, Johnny boy? I stole her from you and gave her to a loving couple incapable of having a child of their own. And honestly, they did a much better job of raising her than you ever could have.
he calmly stated. "Why would you do this to me?"
Because I can. And if you even think of attacking me, a bullet will be through your head so fast your fucking head will spin.
I didn't know what to do. I fell to my knees and began sobbing. Why did I let this happen? Why, God? Fucking why? What the fuck was the point of any of this? I thought there was something strange about her. How could I have been so stupid? People always say, when you look into the abyss looks back. As I stood there, over the corpse of my dead daughter, looking into the eyes of the man who led me down the road to hell, I knew I was no longer looking down toward a monster. I was looking at an equal. The amount of self-loathing and hatred that lurked in my soul left me devoid of any other feelings. I knew that I was even more despicable than the monster that had dragged me down here, for he at least knew he was doing wrong. I have been nothing but a vigilante masquerading as a hero. I'm no hero. I never was. It's ironic in a way. I became the very thing I set out to destroy. Quickly picking up my knife, I lunged at the man. I was stopped mid-motion, and everything faded into black.